My sister and mom stole my car, left a note on the fridge, and ignored my calls while I worked 3 jobs to support them after my dad passed away. So, I took everything I bought and moved out. I am the oldest sibling in my family, and I have a younger sister named Kiki. Being the older one, I have financially supported my family for years after my dad's passing. 4 years ago, Dad passed away in a hit-and-run accident. When the ambulance finally arrived, it was already too late, and he was declared dead at the scene. To make things worse, the person responsible was never caught, leaving us with profound grief and frustration that justice was never served. Since Dad was the sole earner in the family, we struggled to stay afloat after his death. At the time, I was just about to graduate college, so I quickly started looking for jobs. Thankfully, I secured a stable job right after graduation. Mom, having never worked outside the home, struggled to find a job while grieving. I assured her I would take care of things, though I was dealing with my own grief. I had to focus on supporting my family. From a young age, the responsibilities of the household fell on my shoulders. Initially, my salary was enough to support myself, Mom, and Kiki. But as expenses grew, I realized that covering household costs and supporting my family required more than a regular 9-to-5 job. I took on overtime and part-time jobs, never resting properly or taking leave, as I couldn't afford to. Despite exhaustion, the thought of my family depending on me kept me going. Over time, I noticed Kiki was the complete opposite of me. She contributed nothing to the household and pursued a career as a spiritual teacher, which brought little financial relief. While I respected her passion, her work didn't help with our financial needs. She had few clients, and those she did have paid very little. Despite my efforts to encourage her to change careers, she claimed that being a spiritual teacher was her calling. Kiki continued to demand money for anything she needed, often spending it on high-end organic foods and regular beauty treatments. For instance, she would demand $300 for manicures, hair treatments, or other services. When I refused, she would yell at Mom or even steal money from her purse. Mom, caught in the middle, tried to talk to Kiki, urging her to find a steady job. But Kiki showed no willingness to change and continued living a lifestyle we couldn't afford. Recently, Kiki started dating a guy who, from what I could tell, was unreliable and untrustworthy. He strung her along without publicly acknowledging her as his girlfriend and regularly hung out with other women behind her back. Eventually, Kiki caught him with one of his so-called friends. When she confronted him, he refused to apologize, claiming he had done nothing wrong. Their argument escalated, and Kiki, feeling deeply hurt and betrayed, punched him in the face and threw several of his belongings around the room. She even threatened harm to him and any other woman he might be involved with. The commotion was loud enough that neighbors called the police. When officers arrived, they saw that Kiki had been the aggressor. Because this was her first offense and the boyfriend didn't press charges, they let her go with a warning. I thought this experience might lead her to reflect and change her behavior, but instead, she showed no remorse. She claimed her actions were justified and had no regrets about how she handled the situation. Following the breakup, Kiki began using it as an excuse to avoid responsibility. She spent most of her time sulking or going out late at night, often returning drunk and bringing strangers home. I tried talking to her, hoping she would realize the harm she was causing to herself and our family, but she dismissed my concerns as overreactions. One day, Mom pulled me aside to express her growing concern about Kiki. She revealed that Kiki wasn't just drinking heavily or smoking weed anymore, she had started using harder drugs. This revelation explained why Kiki had been demanding more money lately. Mom feared Kiki's self-destructive behavior would spiral further out of control and suggested we intervene. I proposed professional help, rehab, counseling, or therapy, but Mom resisted the idea, saying it was our responsibility as her family to help her. Then she surprised me by mentioning she had researched a luxury wellness retreat that allowed participants to bring companions. She believed spending a week there with Kiki would be therapeutic. I was stunned, not only because this seemed excessive but also because we couldn't afford such an expense. My income barely covered our bills, let alone a luxury retreat. When I questioned how she planned to fund this idea, Mom suggested I use the money I had been saving for a used car. I had been diligently setting aside money to reduce my grueling 3-hour commute. A car wasn't a luxury, it was essential for my daily routine and would ultimately benefit the entire household. I explained this to Mom, but she insisted that Kiki's mental health took priority and said we couldn't stand by and do nothing for her. I suggested more practical alternatives, like finding a local therapist for Kiki. Mom seemed to reluctantly agree, and I thought the matter was settled. But I was wrong. The following evening, I came home exhausted from work to find the house eerily empty. Mom was usually watching TV or reading, but there was no sign of her or Kiki. At first, I thought they might be out shopping, but when I walked into the kitchen, I saw a note taped to the fridge. Written in Mom's handwriting, it read, "Sorry we couldn't wait for you. Kiki and I are on our way to the luxury retreat. I know you'll be upset, but honestly, money can always be earned back. Your sister's mental health comes first. We'll see you in a week." I stood there in disbelief. My heart raced as I logged into my bank account. Mom had access to it, and sure enough, every dollar I had carefully saved was gone. She had drained my account entirely to fund this retreat. I couldn't process the betrayal. How could she justify stealing money I worked so hard to save, money I needed to improve my life, for something I never agreed to? Anger and sadness consumed me. I left several voicemails for Mom, trying to make her understand how deeply she hurt me. She didn't respond. The only message I received was a single text from Kiki, a winking emoji. That smug, thoughtless gesture confirmed that she couldn't care less about the pain I was feeling. I felt utterly betrayed, unsupported, and alone. After everything I sacrificed for my family, this was how they treated me. It was a breaking point. After a sleepless night, I realized something had to change. The betrayal over my savings was a wake-up call, forcing me to confront the fact that my loyalty to my family had cost me my own happiness and stability. I decided it was time to take control of my life. The next day, I started packing everything I had bought over the years: kitchen appliances, home decor, furniture, and anything else I had contributed to the house. These were things I had paid for with my hard-earned money, and I wasn't going to leave them behind. I reached out to a close friend, who graciously offered to let me stay with her temporarily while I searched for my own apartment. By the time Mom and Kiki returned from their retreat, the house was nearly empty. I didn't leave a note or explanation. I wanted them to feel the weight of my absence without any forewarning. When they arrived and saw the stripped-down house, the calls began. My phone was flooded with voicemails, mostly from Mom, asking where I was and what had happened to all the things in the house. After letting them stew for a few hours, I finally called Mom back. She had me on speakerphone, with Kiki in the background. Both demanded to know why I had left. Mom tried to justify her actions, saying Kiki was feeling much better after the retreat and that I shouldn't still be upset. I calmly explained that I had moved out for good and they were now on their own. This prompted an outburst. Mom pleaded with me to return, saying she was willing to talk things over. Kiki, meanwhile, shouted louder than ever, accusing me of being selfish and punishing them for no reason. She even tried to guilt-trip me, claiming I was abandoning them and leaving them to starve. Mom chimed in, calling my decision an overreaction and urging me to calm down and come home. But for the first time in years, I felt no guilt. Instead, I felt a sense of liberation. I calmly told them that their actions had consequences and I was done supporting them. They had made their choices, now, they could live with them. Mom tried to make promises, saying she'd never take my money again and that things would be different if I came back. I laughed bitterly. I told her it didn't matter because I had already protected myself. I had removed her access to my bank account and wasn't going to send them any more money. From now on, they were truly on their own. I reminded them they still had the house Dad had paid for, and if they wanted to stay afloat, they would need to find jobs immediately. Kiki erupted in anger, yelling about how unfair I was being. She demanded to know how they were supposed to survive without money or food. Mom joined in, calling me selfish and stubborn, but I wasn't fazed. I had heard their guilt trips too many times before. I calmly ended the call and blocked their numbers. For the first time in years, I felt a sense of freedom. I was no longer burdened by their expectations or their constant demands. I knew it would be a tough lesson for them, but they needed to understand the consequences of exploiting me and taking advantage of my hard work. Over the following days, I informed my boss and a few close colleagues about the situation, just in case Mom or Kiki decided to show up at my workplace. Everyone was supportive and understanding. Knowing I had people on my side made me feel even more empowered. Months passed, and I began rebuilding my life. I found a small apartment of my own, not much, but it was mine. For the first time, I felt a sense of independence and security. I started saving again, this time for the car I had always needed, and for once, my savings felt safe. Without the constant drain of supporting Mom and Kiki, I could finally focus on my own future. A few months after I moved out, Mom and Kiki showed up at my office unannounced. Mom looked exhausted, with sunken eyes and a worn expression. She ran to me in tears, pleading for me to come back home. Kiki, on the other hand, wasted no time blaming me for abandoning them and making their lives difficult. She insisted that I should stop playing around and return, claiming they had learned their lesson. She even said she was finally ready to get a job, as if that would undo years of entitlement. Mom tried to guilt-trip me, saying Dad would have been disappointed in me for leaving. But I stood firm. I calmly replied that Dad would have been proud of me for cutting my losses and prioritizing my own well-being. I explained how much better my life had become without their constant demands. I told them it was wrong to show up uninvited and warned that if they did it again, I would call the police. Mom cried harder, and Kiki begged for money one last time, but I refused. They left begrudgingly, and that was the last time I saw them in person. Since then, I've heard through old neighbors that Mom has started working at a diner to support herself and Kiki, while Kiki still hasn't found a proper job. Apparently, Kiki's boyfriend moved in, and while he works, it's unclear how much stability he brings. It breaks my heart to think of Mom working so hard while Kiki continues to avoid responsibility, but I've accepted that their choices are no longer my concern. Today, I'm living a life free from their control. I've focused on healing, setting boundaries, and building a future that's mine alone. For the first time, I feel like I'm truly living, and it feels incredible.